If you have a Bible, it takes a little while. You've got to do all this stuff yourself. But if you have a Bible and you'd like to follow along, please turn into the 24th chapter of Luke. This is where we'll be spending our time. Last week we spent just a little time talking about the fact that part of the difficulty we have when we look at these narratives is we're looking at them from a perspective that really distorts the narrative. For instance, here we are in the 21st century, where we have a history behind us of hearing about Jesus. If we've been in church at all, we recognize that the story of the gospel is there in front of us. We think about things like the resurrection, and there's a certain degree of acceptance within us to say, well, yeah, we can understand how that could happen. And so when we come to this narrative, it's very difficult to plug ourselves into what these women had as expectations when they went to the tomb. And they're in for a jolt that we don't feel in that same way. So let's take a look at the text and see what it would show us this morning about that jolt. Verse 1 of chapter 24. On the first day of the week at dawn, the women went to the tomb, taking the aromatic spices that they had prepared for Jesus' body. And they found that the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. But when they went in, they didn't find Jesus' body in the tomb. While they were puzzled about this, suddenly 2 men stood beside them in dazzling attire. The women were terribly frightened. They bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's been raised. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinners and be crucified and on the 3rd day rise again." The women then remembered the words, and they returned from the tomb and told all of these things to the other disciples and the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told these things to the apostles. But the words seemed like nonsense to those who were gathered, and they didn't believe the women. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, and he bent down and saw only the strips of cloth that lay there, and he went home wondering what had happened. I am going to say Peter's reaction is really the only one here that makes good sense. Because these women, you remember, they didn't have time to prepare Jesus' body. They didn't have time to do all this spicing and dressing of the body for burial because it was too close to the end of the day on Friday, which means the beginning of the Jewish Sabbath, and they just didn't have enough time to do all these things. All they had time to do, take Jesus off the cross, Joseph carries him, puts him in the hole, covers the hole up with the stone, and that's all they had time to do. So they were coming back to perform on the first day of the week, which is our Sunday, to do the things they had not been able to do that Friday. Mideastern tombs were just a hole. It was like a rock face. I don't know how they did this with tools that they had available, but they did. They would cut, the stone must be fairly soft. They would cut a hole in the rock and then cut a chamber into the rock, and they'd make a little shelf out of the rock. The hole would be a round one. It wasn't very big. I mean, we always imagine, a hole big enough for somebody to just walk through. It wasn't like that at all. The hole might be this big around. You had to kind of crouch down to get in and out of these things. And then inside, when they got ready to close it up, there was a ledge that they would carve in the rock, once again in the rock face, and they would find a stone that was relatively rounded, and they would roll it over the hole, and that was it. That was the Middle Eastern grave that you would expect to find in this. And we also have another perspective about this too. We're so used to going out there and look at all those tombstones out there. I mean, you can walk 3 feet in any direction, you come upon another grave. These graveyards weren't like that. I mean, how many rock faces do you have available to carve a tomb out of? So you might have a tomb here, and then a quarter mile away there might be another one. So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of people struggle with the idea that the women could have gone to the wrong tomb. Well, that's just impossible, because again, it's not like this. This tomb was a known spot. Everybody knew it. They knew exactly where they were going. There were no other tombs around to be confused with this one. So there's a lot here that we don't capture because we're living in the time when a graveyard looks like that. And so there are discrepancies in these accounts. Now this is something I want to spend just a minute on. If you read John's Gospel, Matthew's Gospel, Luke's Gospel, and Mark's Gospel, there will be differences in this moment, right? How many women? Matthew records 1 angel. Luke records 2. John records 2. Mark says there was 1. How come these things are different? Now, some people find a lot of trouble in this. They say, oh my gosh, they can't even get the thing straight. Look, Chelsea could probably speak to this. If you interview 3 people from the scene of a crime, and let's say these people are under suspicion, right? You got 3 people, you're scratching your head, maybe one of these 3 did it, and all 3 of them tell you exactly the same story. You know that these guys got together and cooked it up. You know they did. They got together and they said, all right, now when you sit down, be sure and tell them, you know, there was only 2 angels, or there was 1 angel. The reason they read differently is different people were interviewed about different things and different people wrote it down. If I found it all reading exactly the same, I'd be like Chelsea and say, these people cooked this thing up. It can't be true because nobody's going to agree like that. But the fact that there are these minor detail differences tells me these people are just reporting what they were told by people who saw it, right? The other thing is there's a backbone here that says this is truth. And the reason for that is nobody says anything but that the tomb was empty. There's not one recording anywhere that says they went to the tomb of Jesus and found him laying in there. Not one. Go back through all the historical records. Nobody has ever turned up anything from that era or even close to it that said, no, they had the body. That says something to me. So that the fact that there were 1 angel in one account or 2 in another doesn't change anything about the fact that when they got to the hole, there was nobody in there and the stone had been moved. That's the backbone of the story. That's the part that really, really matters. That's what produces the reaction in the people who encountered this. Nobody reports Jesus still in the hole. Nobody. There's no competing story with this. That's what people talk about this. The only story that competes with this is what the Jews said then. The Jewish official said, tell somebody that the guards went to sleep and somebody stole the body. That's the only other report there is. So the women, when they come to the tomb, they're just like you and me. They come to it and they're just mystified. Where is he? What has happened? They're not. We come to it because we were raised up from this high in Sunday school and we see Jesus coming out of the tomb, right? And he's raised from the dead. They don't think that. They don't think that at all. They don't have anything in their Jewish background that would tell them that Jesus is alive from the dead. Not one thing. The Jewish understanding of resurrection is on the last day at the end of the world, when God, the day of the Lord, as Isaiah called it, and all the Old Testament writers who prophesied it called it, God will set everything right and everybody, good and bad, will be raised up to stand before God. That's the Jewish understanding. So when they come to the tomb and they find Jesus gone, you remember in John 20, another account, what did they say? My Lord is gone and I don't know where they have taken him. That's the right thing to expect, right? When you come to a grave, look, I've been to funerals, you've been to funerals. If you were at a funeral and you went home from the funeral, you watched them, the coffin's laying up there on the rack, like we do, over the hole. The people who dig those graves have set everything up with that fake grass and all that they put over the hole, and they're going to lower the person into the hole. You don't come back the next day. If you did come back, if I came back the next day and I found the coffin on top of the ground, open, and nobody in there, would I think, if I didn't know anything about Jesus, would I think they'd been raised from the dead? No, I'd say somebody's messed with the grave here. Somebody has come and done something here. That's exactly what these women think. They have no idea. So the strange men then appear at this place. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. These women don't have any mental matrix to plug any of this into. We think they do because we're 21 centuries beyond it, and we've all been raised up to believe it. In some way or another, we were told as children. They don't have any of that background. It's so hard for us to plug ourselves into that thinking. Our background is so deep. And the question the angel asks them is really a sharp, embarrassing question. Don't you remember what he said? Can you imagine being there, one of those women? I mean, oh my gosh. First of all, you got these two really weird looking guys that are glowing. I mean, for me, that would settle the issue. I'm going as fast as I can the other way. I'm not staying around to see. If I don't know anything about angels or the Bible or anything, all you'll see of me is the dust that I'm raising as I run, because this doesn't look right to me. The women are asked this really sharp question by these angels. I'm surprised. It says they bowed to the ground because they were afraid. You ever notice something in the Bible about angels? They always do this. First thing, what is the first thing that an angel says in the Bible when they encounter somebody? Fear not. Why? Because it's scary as all get out. If you got these people that are, whatever name, I've never seen one. I'm just looking at this account and it says they were glowing. Okay, glowing people are kind of frightening, right? I've told that story before where Jackson comes into my bedroom at 2 o'clock or whatever time it was in the morning, and I'm sound asleep, and we had taken Jackson to the swamp park, and Becky bought for him this string of LEDs, with a battery in it inside of a clear tube that glows. Like what do you call that stuff? Light rope or whatever? Anyway, it was about this long. And so I wake up in the middle of the night, and Jackson has come into the bedroom, and under his blanket that he's holding, like Linus, thumb in his mouth, this blanket has the light thing underneath it. So I've got this glowing thing 6 inches from my face. I don't have any idea what I'm looking at, I'm so surprised. I'm too surprised to even be afraid. These women were the same. They don't have any of this to plug their minds into this grid that says, oh, it's an angel. They're not thinking like that. And in their mystification, after talking to the angels, they go to the disciples. Now, they've now been armed with a little information. Remember how he said he would be handed into the hands of sinners, he would be crucified, and then he would be raised from the dead. So they've been told this stuff. So they dutifully go back to the disciples and they report what they have been told. And nobody believes them. Nobody. The word here is leros. In Greek, it means nonsense. That's what the disciples thought the women were saying. Do you know why that is? 2 reasons. One, it sounds like nonsense. I mean, if you think about it. I mean, obviously, if somebody reported to you that this had happened at the funeral you just left, would you think it anything but nonsense? That's what I would think. I'd say, come on, man. I mean, you're telling me something. I don't believe a word you're saying. Take me there and show me, would be my response. Well, there's another reason too. Josephus, in his history, which is written fairly contemporaneous with the Gospels during that period of history, he says women aren't to be believed because they are of such levity of nature, which means they're just like, that's what we would call today airheaded, that we can't believe anything they say. So their testimony doesn't mean anything. And all these disciples are all guys, and they're saying, women said that there were angels and Jesus wasn't in the tomb, and so they don't trust him, they don't believe it. But Peter, to his credit, and why do you think Peter is the one who goes back? Because less than 72 hours prior, he had denied Jesus. And it means a lot if Jesus is alive. To have to face Jesus after you've done all that and you knew Jesus knew. If Jesus is dead and not coming back, at least you're like, whew, I don't have to face Jesus after I denied him. But now he's back. At least according to these women, I better go check it out to see how much trouble I'm really in. So he goes back and looks in there and he comes away wondering. He doesn't believe anything. He just wonders. These women and these disciples are just like us in one particular way. That is, we look at Jesus as a subject for Sunday school, a subject for a sermon, a subject to be talked about among those of us who believe. But how many times do we go through this world and not look at him in the way that he's supposed to be looked at, just like these women were being challenged by this angel to look at him, the living Lord of the universe? That's the difference. The Jesus of the Bible is not who they went to look for. They went, just like the angel said, to look for the dead among the dead. That's what they were hunting. Did you know just this week I was scrolling through my little thing on your phone, the Google News. You got the Google News, and then you got the other news feed. There are a bunch of news feeds, but these little articles, you can scroll through and read them. 2 Christian luminaries. One's a musician, nationally touring band. The other's a pastor out of Maryland. They've both said, we don't believe any of it anymore. Both of them. They look at Jesus now in the way the women were looking at Jesus when they came to the graveyard, as a dead sage. Really smart person, nice person, said a lot of neat things, taught us a lot of good stuff about how we should live, but he's dead. He's still dead. We love the moral teaching. We love all the things that we should incorporate to make our lives better, abundant life. Well, if I'll just do what Jesus said, I'll have abundant life. We believe all that, but raised from the dead, I can't go there. I remember a friend of ours in Pennsylvania. He was coming to the church we had there. He attended regularly. He had found a community of people that really loved him. He didn't really have a lot of friends. He was the owner of a music store that we frequented. A lot of musicians in that church. We would go to his music store, and he started coming to the church because we were all going in there and inviting him. And finally he showed up one Sunday, and then he started going. And after a year, I thought, I want to talk to Al. His name was Al. We'll say that anyhow. And so Becky and I had Al over for dinner. We were having tuna fish casserole. I remember what we had to eat. And Al loved tuna fish. So we were happy Al was going to eat something he liked. And so we were sitting on the couch after dinner, and I said, Al, what's the problem with the gospel for you, that you can't believe it? He said, I love Jesus' message. I love all the teachings. I love the Bible, all the things I'm learning, and the friends and all the community, all this stuff, the way you love people in your church, the way everybody loves each other. He said, I love all of that, but I can't get over this idea that he came back from the grave. I can't swallow that pill. Decent, good, hardworking people all over the country right now and all over the world are sitting in church services all over. They give, they're nice people, they love the teachings, they love all those things, but they can't come to the place where they say, I believe he came back from the tomb alive. Because it means something to them that makes everything like this different. This whole story becomes very different if Jesus came out of the tomb alive. That means he's here now. And that means for you and me that as we walk through this world, he walks with us. We still live in many respects like Jesus is just a dead sage. We think of it this way. We come to a church service, or we read a book, or we hear a song, or something reminds us of God and his reality. And then 5 minutes later, something comes into our life of a moment of passion. Whatever passion, I don't mean passion like romantic passion, I mean anything passion. Something that we really want to do, or we really think we should have, or we really want to say back to somebody, or we really want to, whatever it is. And then all that thought of who Jesus is just evaporates. And we do the thing, say the thing, are the thing, go to the place, whatever it is. People want to cozy up to Jesus, but to want him alive, walking with us through this world, oh my, that's very different, because there are lots of things we might want to do and say. I mean, look at the Sermon on the Mount. I did 30 weeks here on the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't like the Sermon on the Mount. For anybody who says they like that, yeah, I like it for you, but I don't like it for me, because it's too hard. It's just too hard. There's not a word in the Sermon on the Mount that I can read and say, oh, if people read the Sermon on the Mount like they read the funny paper or the newspaper, C.S. Lewis said it so well. He said, anybody that can read the Sermon on the Mount and not be impacted by it, like somebody hitting you in the forehead with a sledgehammer, hasn't read the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, it's a crushing thing to me to read it. And yet, people who say they look at Jesus as the example to live by, there's the example. I can't do that. That's why I don't like the Sermon on the Mount. I can't do it. When you and I went to school, I don't know if you remember this, when I was in school, that's been a long time. When I was in school, we had paper they handed out. It was shaped like this. It was turned sideways, and the lines were across it. There were 2 bold lines and a dotted line in the middle. It was about that tall. And you would be handed one of these by the teacher, and across it would be the 4 or 5 letters you were learning that week, right? Not in cursive, but in regular, whatever you call the other kind of writing. And your job was, as a first grader, was to look at that picture and then take your little pencil, your big fat pencil we used to have, and copy it. That's what you did every day. You copied those letters. At first, it was really hard to copy the letters. Well, when I look at Jesus and who he is, copying Jesus, I'm never going to learn that. I'm not ever going to be able to copy Jesus unless he's alive. And if he is alive and what the Bible says of him is true, then he lives in me. And then slowly through my lifetime, I can start to copy him a little better and better all the way as I go. You see the beautiful difference between Jesus as a dead sage and this horrible Sermon on the Mount that I've got to try to live by alone is that as a follower of Jesus, with him living in me, I don't have to do it by myself. I can learn to copy him because he's there to teach me to do so. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I said anything, you got a question for me, you want to